Well, I thought I had an idea for a sermonette all week long, and then I kind of went to work on it yesterday afternoon, and it took a whole different direction, and I had to go back and change the first part of it to match the last. So the title of it is Check Your Motives. What is a motive? It's defined as something that causes a person to act a certain way or do a certain thing. Are they really that important, motives? Yes, they are. Even if you want the right thing, but for the wrong reason or motive, you will eventually want the wrong thing because the motivation is wrong and it will lead you in the wrong direction. Your motives can also hinder your prayers. In James 4:3, it says, "You ask and do not receive, because you ask with the wrong motives, so that you may spend it on your own pleasures." Proverbs 16:2 says, "All the ways of a man are clean in his own sight, but the Lord weighs the motives." Jeremiah 17:9 and 10, "The heart is more deceitful than all else and is desperately sick. Who can understand it? I, the Lord, search the heart and test the mind." We can be deceived about our motives. We can actually want the right thing, but for the wrong reason. Case in point, if I desire to come up here and speak to you because I want to glorify God, try to tell you what He wanted me to say out of love, that's a good motive. If I want to come up here and speak because I think it makes me look good, that's a bad motive. It's the same action, but a wrong motive. Anything coming from financial or personal gain or selfish ambition, whatever it is the flesh is seeking after, would be a wrong motive. While right motives would be advancement of God's kingdom or bringing Him glory. Let's turn to Romans 8:5-8. Romans 8, starting in verse 5. "For those who are according to the flesh set their minds on the things of the flesh, but those who are according to the Spirit, the things of the Spirit. For the mind set on the flesh is death, but the mind set on the Spirit is life and peace. Because the mind set on the flesh is hostile towards God, for it does not subject itself to the law of God, for it is not even able to do so. And those who are in the flesh cannot please God." Any motivation that originates in our flesh can't please God. Another example of maybe a right thing in my own life, at one point I was in debt pretty deep, and I was asking God, to allow me to make more so that I could get out of debt. Well, getting out of debt's not a bad action, but what I was doing was asking Him to make it easy for me, and eventually I got the answer. He said, "Manage better what you already have." And so I started praying in that direction. Let's turn to Matthew 6, 1-6. And in that, my prayers became to help me to manage better instead of give me more, making it easy. I mean, really, it seems crazy now that I would even ask something like that, because if you had a child that you were giving any kind of resource to, and he was managing it poorly, thinking that he needed more, it would be the absolute wrong thing to do to give that child more. Matthew 6, 1 through 6. Beware of practicing your righteousness before men to be noticed by them. Otherwise you have no reward with your Father who is in heaven. So when you give to the poor, do not sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, so that they may be honored by men. Truly I say to you, they have their reward in full. Pay attention to those two words, in full. But when you give to the poor, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving will be in secret, and your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. When you pray, you are not to be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and on the street corners, so that they may be seen by men. Truly I say to you, they have their reward in full. Now, obviously the motivation in these two examples didn't come from a desire to glorify God. They were wanting to be seen by men. And twice Jesus tells them, Jesus says they have their reward in full. Now, if you pay something in full, you write paid in full on a check, that means that's it. Your debt's canceled, you're done. They're not going to get any more than they have. He says they have their reward in full. It's over with. It's done. I don't think we want the reward that the Lord is speaking of in those examples. I'm not going to go there for the sake of time, but Philippians 1, 15 through 17, Christ can even be preached with the wrong motives. It was Paul was speaking, and there was some brethren in, I think it was 15, that were actually preaching Christ, but it was out of selfish motivation, and they were trying to cause him distress. So those were some kind of negative examples. In 1 Thessalonians 2:4, it says, "But just as we have been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel, so we speak not as pleasing men, but God who examines our hearts." So again, our motive needs to be pleasing God in love. Proverbs 4:23, "Guard your heart with all diligence, for from it flow the springs of life." You could say guard your motives. And I've got 8 questions here that I've asked myself a couple of these at times, but I can't take credit for the listing. But let's ask ourselves, if no one knows, this will help you to see, more clearly what your motivation would be. If no one knows what I'm doing in giving, serving, or sacrificing, would I still do it? If there was no visible payoff for doing this, would I still do it? Would I joyfully take a lesser position if God asked me to? Am I doing this for praise of others or how it makes me feel? If I have to suffer for continuing what God has called me to do, would I continue? If others misunderstand or criticize my actions, would I stop? If those whom I am serving never show gratitude or repay me in any way, will I still do it? Do I judge my success or failure based on my faithfulness to what God has asked me to do, or do I judge it by how I compare with others? Brethren, we must be honest with ourselves about our motivations. or our reason for doing the things that we do. We can do good things all day long if we don't have the right motivation. We cannot hide the motivation from God. He knows the heart. Jesus had perfect motives, of course. He's our perfect example. And in John 4:34, it tells us that his food is to do the will of him who sent me, which was God, and to finish his work. That was Christ's motivation. Perfect example. In closing, we should view our life as if we're looking at our future, of what's in store for us if we remain faithful, and that is to be in the presence and glory of God forever. This should be our true motivation. Our only hope in operating from pure motives is to walk in the Spirit. In Galatians 5:16 it says, "But I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not carry out the desires of the flesh." In verse 25 it says, "If we live by the Spirit, let us also walk by the Spirit." In doing this, we allow God to control, not our flesh, or our desire, and our desire, our motives will be to please him. Praise the Lord.